All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is our third Tuesdays at TAP for Autism Awareness Month. We're really excited to have you all here. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. This evening we have Dustin Haraden, who is going to be speaking about sleep as it relates to individuals on the autism spectrum. I am going to let Jeannie Kramer is going to be hosting this evening, and I'll let her take over from here. Thanks, Jeannie.
Welcome, everyone. I have the great honor of introducing Dustin to you this evening, but before we get started, I wanted to go over some housekeeping issues. I had a question in the registration. Is this going to be recorded? Yes, it is. And it will be up on our Facebook page and website. Give us a week or two to process that and be looking for it. Feel free to contact any one of us who are listed on the TAP website to follow up if you don't see it in a couple of weeks, but it should be up in a couple of weeks, maybe even a week. So if you need to hop off at any time, feel free to do that. Also wanted to let you know how the format of the evening is going to go. We are planning to have Dustin tell us what he knows about sleep, and he has had access to the questions that you gave us during registration, so he'll be answering those, hopefully most of them during his presentation. After his presentation, we are going to open up a Q&A session. And how we will do that, because of the number of participants, we will have cameras off and all of you will be muted. But we will be using the chat to take questions. So in order for all of us to practice using the chat, for those of us who aren't familiar with Zoom, I'd like you to take your cursor and hover over the bed where you see the person sleeping, and the chat button below should populate, and hit on that button. And just so I know that everyone is tracking here, I'm going to have you type in your favorite ice cream. So go ahead and do that so we can make sure that the chat is working. All right, we got vanilla, strawberry, and chocolate. All right, good. It sounds like everyone's up and going, and now we're dreaming about that bowl of ice cream we're going to have after Dustin is done presenting. And I will take the time now to introduce him. Dustin is a doctoral student here at the University of Illinois, working with Dr. Benjamin Henkin. He has his degree, his bachelor degree from University of Denver in psychology and philosophy, bachelor and master degree. His research right now is concentrating on the relationship between circadian rhythms, sleep, and depression and anxiety in youth. So very pertinent to our population here. He has clinical experience working with youth and their families who've experienced trauma and using trauma-focused behavioral therapies. And he also works with Dr. Amy Cohen from the psychology department. And for the past 3 years has been conducting and working on the team who is assessing for autism there. So without, he also leads some groups for us that focus on developing social skills and relationships and internet safety for youth on the spectrum. So he is definitely a wealth of knowledge, very valuable to our program, and I am very excited to hear what he has to share with us this evening. Welcome, Dustin.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I look forward to talking about my knowledge and experiences that I've had, and hopefully help orient you to experiences of sleep. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So although I've really read a lot and I've done lots of research and different experiences with sleep and with youth and those on the spectrum, I'm not an expert when it comes to your children. So your kids are, you're going to know your kids better than anybody. And so I hope to provide you with some information, and then you can use that and apply it to your own children. And I'll apologize here in advance. My daughter is being put down to sleep right now, so you might hear her in the background, or you might hear some dogs barking. But yeah, that you might hear in the background. So we'll go ahead, and this is something that you may be somewhat familiar with. You've come to a talk about sleep, and you most likely have dealt with individuals on the spectrum who have a sleep difficulty or sleep problem. And you can see that up to about 80% of youth have some sort of sleep problem who are on the spectrum. This is compared to typical development peers who ranges to about 25 to 40%. And you'll see here that only about 30% have then been diagnosed with a sleep disorder. So there are different sleep problems that one can have, and then that will translate into a disorder. You can see there that that translation isn't always there. And this might be something either from your own experience, from you having poor sleep, getting a poor night's sleep. There are increased instances of physical aggression, irritability, inattention, hyperactivity. So it takes a lot of the experiences and difficulties that someone may have and amplifies them, makes it more difficult. And so this is going to be somewhat of the overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give some introduction into how researchers and sleep specialists think about and talk about sleep. So you have that idea and that framework if you want to go in and talk to a provider, or just to have that knowledge. And then I'll talk about what are some things that can be helpful in what are some supports for sleep, talking about sleep hygiene or stimulus control, various things that can help with getting to sleep, maintaining sleep, and having that consistent schedule. And then if you do translate and want to go see a sleep specialist, what are some things that you might be expected to do, or some of the experiences that you might have going into that space? And like Jeannie was saying, I hope we'll have some time at the end for some questions. I'd love to talk about this some more and provide some more information. So we'll first start with how people think, how sleep is thought about. And there is this common model, which is called the two-process model. So there are two things that happen simultaneously. There is first the circadian rhythm, which we're psychologists, so we're not super good at coming up with names, so we just call it process C for circadian. And then process S is going to look at the sleep pressure. And this will be the amount of pressure that you have when you go to sleep. And I'll explain that here with a little bit more detail. So this here is we're going to focus first on that circadian clock. So this is the circadian rhythm. And you can see here on the screen that I've broken it up into, we'll say, about 3 days, where we have daylight and nighttime. And whenever you draw a sun, it has to have sunglasses on. So that's what you see there. And then, oh, I went all the way to the end. That's all right. Well, that's not going to be it. We're going to go back to the beginning here. Just 1 second. Get a quick preview of everything that I was going to talk about already. So all right, and we're back here. I won't push that button again. We have the 3 days here, and that is going to, the circadian rhythm is going to look pretty much like, you think back to high school, this is like a sine wave where it goes up and down and it keeps oscillating every day. And you can see most of the time when it's perfectly aligned with the day and night schedule, you will see that there is the peak alertness right in the middle of the day, or towards like around 2 o'clock maybe, and then it slowly declines. And this is that circadian rhythm. So this is what a lot of people will talk about when they talk about circadian rhythms. And then what we see here is now thinking about the sleep pressure and how this relates to sleep. So Sleep pressure is, it is like you can think of it as a gas, where when you wake up, the pressure continues to increase and increase and increase to hopefully get you to go to sleep. So I like to think of it as a pressure cooker where you wake up. I'm not sponsored by Instant Pot. They're just a really great tool. So go out and try one. But you can think of it that pressure increases and increases over time. So here you can think about that you wake up and the pressure continues to increase until it gets to an optimal amount. And then you go to sleep and all that pressure is released. So then the pressure decreases until you wake up again. But sometimes you stay awake for too long and you'll enter into the danger zone where you become too sleepy, it continues to increase, and then this is when you begin to doze and the sleep pressure is too immense. And this is where people can become extremely agitated, or when they tend to fall asleep more easily. So now putting these two processes together, we'll take a look. Here again is our circadian rhythm that we're looking at. And you notice that I've now drawn a line across, which we'll think of as this pressure 0 point. So when your sleep pressure is fully depleted, which is what we would like to have, where you go to sleep at the right time, so then your sleep pressure is back to normal once you start the day again. So you'll see here then in orange where our sleep pressure increases, and you can see that our pressure is continuing to increase until we hit that optimal level, where then it decreases. Because we've fallen asleep, that pressure is gone, and we're able to continue on that curve. And you can see how these two pieces, these two processes are overlapping. And this will continue day in and day out as long as these things are continue to be in line. And we'll talk a little bit later about what it means when they are not aligned. But for right now, you can think about what would happen if you're staying up all night. So this might be, maybe yourself or your children have a project that needs to be completed, so you stay up all night and you are having difficulty. So this would be a normal night here. And then you can see that it increases, and our sleep pressure just continues to build. And then we try to get back to normal. And there's again our pressure 0 line, which two things that you can notice here is the fact that our pressure is increased. And you can see that the time when we're asleep is going to be at a different point. And then here is staying up later. So this would be, we have 3 nights here. And again, there's our pressure 0 line. But this is the idea that things continue to increase and your child is going to bed just a little bit later. You can notice that second gray box there is a little bit later than the first one. And then what happens is the pressure wasn't fully able to be released. So then they're more tired, and you can see that that sleep line gets a little bit higher even there. And then also it continues to get later and later in the night. And then what happens when there is a nap? So this is the idea that our sleep pressure continues to increase. And you can see that during the nap time, when somebody were to take a nap, they weren't able to release all the sleep pressure, or it released too much sleep pressure. And you can see where that circle is, that now you don't have as much sleep pressure, so you don't feel like you are ready to go to sleep. And our pressure gauge on the left-hand side, you can see right there where the red is, it's not as high as it was before, if we were to think back to our previous amount of sleep pressure that we were having. So this is these two pieces, and how carrying forward what we'll talk about is wanting things to be consistent. And you want ideally to have these things to be consistent, because if you do stay up late and then take a nap to try to recuperate or recover, and then you are in that circle, that red circle, and it turns out that you're trying to go to sleep and you're just tossing and turning and you're having a really hard time with that. And so that the two process is how a lot of people have thought about sleep and those things overlaying. And this is just to talk a little bit more about that circadian rhythm piece. So focusing in on the green line, that one that oscillates up and down, we have the circadian rhythm. These are other rhythms. You can think about how we live day to day, that we live in a very rhythmic world, that the sun rises and falls, that seasons come and go. There are these different cycles. So a lot of the things that we do operate on some sort of cycle. So what we'll be focusing on moving forward, as we have been, is the circadian rhythm, which operates on that 24-hour schedule. So we'll take a look here again at the 3 days that I have. And this time, I'm going to put on this sunlight line, where you can see that the sunlight is most intense at the middle of the day, and then it's going to be very dark during the evening. So the sunlight is you're going to have no sunlight. Then if we overlay that same circadian rhythm, you can see there all of the green is going to relate to the circadian rhythm system. And this is when things are aligned, where you can see that you are most alert at the brightest time of day. And then that is going to decline, and you can see how these will overlap, and this is how our sleep becomes most efficient. Focusing on the circadian rhythm, though, the way that we orient our circadian system to the light and day schedule is through entrainment. This is how we synchronize our clock to the day schedule. Some interesting work has shown that even if we don't have if you were put in isolation and you're not able to see the sunrise and sunset, which may feel like being self-isolated in what we're doing right now, but with no windows, and your circadian rhythm will actually fall on just over 24 hours. So the way that we need to orient ourselves back to this light and dark schedule is through entrainment. And this is by using Zeitgebers, which is just a fun word to say. So feel free to say it right now if you want. But the most potent or the most impactful is going to be light. And there are other activities that can help orient, or I like to think of these as anchors. So usually you're going to be eating lunch around the same time, or you're going to be waking up around the same time, going outside during the same time when we had a semi-normal schedule before this isolation and distancing. But there are these rhythms that happen throughout your day, and your body orients to that, and then orients itself to the light and dark schedule. And the way it does this is through another really fun word to say, suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is the epicenter. This is the control center of the circadian rhythm system. And it is very sensitive to light, where it is right behind, I think that's how brains work, but it is right behind the eyes, and it operates right and is very sensitive to light, where it will release various, like melatonin and things like that. It will release these to either initiate sleep or to decrease the need for sleep. And this is why light is a very potent and very great Zeitgeber. And this is another word that you might have heard in terms of thinking about sleep and circadian rhythms. This is the idea that individuals have different preferences for when they are most efficient or most effective. And this can usually be termed in like you're a morning person or an evening person, or you're a lark or a night owl. And there tend to be these categories that occur. There's also an intermediate type, which falls right in the middle, and that's where most people fall. But most of the studies and most of the work have focused on these two extremes, this either being morning oriented or being evening oriented. And if we go back to our figure here, you can see that, again, we have our sunlight, we have those waves there, and then we have an individual's circadian process. And if somebody is going to be more of a morning person, you can see that the peak performance time for any given day is going to be earlier in that day, so more towards the morning. And what can also happen is that circadian rhythm can shift to be a little bit later. And you can see that there are these differences. And there are, through different Zeitgebers or different forms of entrainment, that can perpetuate these types of chronotypes or this type of circadian process. And there's actually a development of these things as well that you can see here this is a study done in 2007 looking at various ages there on the horizontal. And then the higher up you go is going to be more of an evening person. And then the lower there is going to be more of a morning person. And you can see that the younger group, kind of around 10 to 12, is going to be a little bit more morning oriented. So thinking about maybe you have young children or others have young children, they're getting up very early, but then they're also going to sleep very early. So this is the idea that their circadian rhythm is shifted to be more morning oriented. Whereas later right around puberty is when there is this drastic shift towards being more of an evening person. So thinking about maybe teenagers, or when you were a teenager, that wanting to stay up later, but then sleep in a lot later was more beneficial. Something that group tended to want more. And you can see over time, slowly individuals become more morning oriented. So at this point, I know I threw a lot out there, but just as a quick little checkpoint of where we're at, I talked a little bit about the different processes with sleep. There's the two process model with the sleep pressure and the circadian rhythms. And then we dived into what is the circadian rhythm and why should we care about it, thinking about those Zeitgebers. And then overall, there are these developmental kind of normative shifts in chronotype and how it looks over time. And these can be very important in thinking about your own sleep or when certain activities are being planned, to try to think about how do we get somebody to sleep more efficiently, more effectively. That a lot of times when we think about sleep, we think about that period right up until bedtime. So for my daughter, getting it started right now, where she is slowly starting to wind down, we have a routine that we go through to help promote sleep. And so that is even earlier than getting ready to sleep, but thinking even further back to what we do during the day, that it is a 24-hour process in order to think about promoting sleep. So this was just a checkpoint to talk about more of the basis of it. And then, like I say in the slide up next, get ready, there's going to be more talk about sleep, but more about the sleep process and what are some things that we can do. So one thing that I like to orient towards is the National Sleep Foundation has put out a recent recommendation. They've updated their recommendations for different categories of ages in how much people should be sleeping. So you can think about your own sleep, see if it fits in here. But the dark blue spots are going to be, on average, that is what people need. for those different age groups. So you can see that newborns to infants need a lot of sleep. They're sleeping just about half the day, sometimes more. And then you see in the light blue bars above and below, those are going to be confidence intervals or standard deviations, or confidence intervals where if you're in the outside of the dark blue, but inside the light blue, that's still going to be considered okay. And these are going to be ranges that you have to experiment with. I know that I tend to be more on the lower side, but it is finding what is good for you. These are averages, but you're going to know yourself, you're going to know your kids better than anybody. One thing that I like to highlight here, because I work a lot with youth, with children and adolescents, that the National Sleep Foundation has these recommended amounts. And you can see here that around 8 to 9 hours of sleep is what they recommend. There was a recent study that shows that only about 15% of youth were getting that amount, which is very shocking. And there's been lots of work looking at the school schedule and how that relates to almost making sleep very difficult for teenagers. That's just it's a very fascinating thing that a lot of times when we think about sleep, it is something that we recognize as necessary, but a lot of resources don't tend to be put in that area. So the research that I'm citing, there's been a greater focus in the recent years on examining sleep, but that means that it is very understudied, especially in individuals who are on the autism spectrum. So that's just something to keep in mind. There have been research that shows that pushing the school schedule back about an hour actually improves grades, it improves well-being. So there's lots of work that has looked at that. And now thinking a little bit about some of the tools that I hope we can talk a little bit more about, and things that I've found helpful, things that I haven't found helpful. Again, a lot of these are going to be tools that I will provide, but it's up to you to find what works best for your family. Because when a child isn't sleeping in the home, then that means nobody's sleeping. So finding what works best for you is going to be the key. So we'll focus on sleep hygiene, focus on bedtime routines, talking about what a faded bedtime is, what morning reinforcements are, and a bedtime pass. And I'm hoping to be able to touch a little bit on behavioral interventions versus like pharmacological to a certain extent. So one of the most important things when we think about sleep hygiene, or just thinking about hygiene in general, this is what is the process that you're using to sleep? And one of the most important things, which is going to be on this slide, is you need things to be consistent. And usually this slide gets a big laugh, so I hope you're all laughing and thinking about it. But it is key to have the same bedtime. If your child is still having naps, have that try to be as consistent as possible. Same bedtime, same wake time every single day, no matter if it's weekend or not. It is important. And in order to highlight that, we'll go back to the figure so I can show why this may be important. And looking back to our circadian rhythm and the sunlight process, and really overlapping all of the things that I've touched on so far, this is going to be a piece that is, when somebody is perfectly aligned, you will see this type of overlap. But if one thing becomes off, like a circadian rhythm, because somebody sleeps in a little bit later or pulls an all-nighter or a number of different things, that slowly that is going to shift one way or the other. And this isn't to say that things don't come up. I recognize that there are unpredictable things that do happen, and that's okay. This is just the idea that overall we want to try to be as consistent as possible in thinking about our sleep schedules and making sure that it is maintained throughout. One of the big things that comes up in a lot of the youth that I see or that I've helped is this idea of social jet lag. And this occurs when somebody is going to school regularly. So to get back to what I talked about with schools and why there is that big deficit in the amount of individuals who are able to get that amount of sleep, is that most of the time the youth are waking up very early, earlier than their body is telling them that they should wake up. But then they're also staying up a lot later because that's when their body is telling them that they're ready to go and that they should be more active later in the day. And then, so during the week, they are sleep deprived, that the amount of sleep that they're getting is not enough. So then on the weekends, they're sleeping in. Sometimes I remember waking up after noon and having that be almost like a badge of honor where you're able to sleep in a lot later. But then come Monday morning, it's really hard to get back up and you have to start that all over again. The reason why I have LA and New York highlighted here, not because those are two places that I'd like to go to, is that transition from the weekend to the weekday for youth when they sleep in like that is the equivalent of traveling across the country. So that jet lag that you feel if you were to do that trip is the same thing that youth are experiencing each and every week, that transition back to school. So this is why it can be very important to focus on and think about the consistency of our sleep. And some of the ways that we can do that are through these various points. And I'm going to take a quick drink. And these are a few things that whenever you read or think about sleep, talking about sleep, these are pieces that come up often for understanding sleep hygiene, having a good routine. So the first being having a comfortable sleep setting. And this can be very important for some individuals, or it may not be. There may be particular youth or adults who are more sensitive to different lights, different temperatures, different settings. Again, this is going to be a process. I'm not going to be able to say, yes, do these 3 steps and you'll be good to go. It is going to be one, being consistent with these, but then also having some amount of patience and persistence, that you're going to try things for a series of nights. If that's not working, then try some other combination of things. So the first, like I said, is going to be having that comfortable sleep setting. You want to have a comfortable amount of noise, which can range from having a white noise machine in your room, but that may be too distracting. So maybe no noise. There are different views on having the television on at night because it does give off that light. But I know that there are some people who have reported to me that it is extremely comforting to have that on, that they have that noise of something that they've watched before. So if that is you or if that is your child, then you want to continue that as long as it's not interfering or becoming distracting. So then also the amount of what sorts of textures are more comforting. You want to promote sleep as much as possible. Having a comfortable blanket, having a comfortable, maybe a weighted blanket, whatever is going to make you comfortable in those settings. And then the other being timing your meals and when caffeine occurs. When you ingest caffeine, if this is something that you or your child does, that making sure that that does not interfere with that sleep pressure that we talked about before. So having that, remember, we're thinking about sleep as a 24-hour process where you want to make sure the timing of meals is consistent and not too late in the evening. Then, like I've touched on before, avoid trying to take long or late naps because that will release that sleep pressure and make it more difficult to then go to sleep later on. There are also a lot of sleep specialists that talk about your bed being only for sleep. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that when your body is laying down in your bed, that you want the only thing to be doing is sleeping. So this would be no reading in bed, no like watching TV in bed, no doing anything else other than sleeping in bed, which can be really difficult. And I recognize that a lot of these things may be difficult, are definitely going to be difficult, but it is just trying little pieces gradually and consistently. And then trying to limit screen time. 30 to 45 minutes is going to be a good amount, but you can always try to do that sooner and sooner. So having that, there is blue light that promotes the production of melatonin. Remember, if we think back to when I talked about the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that is going to be very sensitive to blue light. That is what natural light is, and that will promote wakefulness. So it will hinder the production of melatonin, meaning that it will be more difficult to fall asleep. There are lots of new apps, and I know that a lot of computers and phones now have different settings on them that will reduce the amount of blue light that someone is viewing or experiencing. And that will do so much, but it's also the fact that screens are interesting. You're going to be wanting to do things. Your mind is going to be engaged. There's going to be a lot of things to do on there, which is not going to be promoting being restful. So now we'll go through some recommendations in terms of what bedtime can look like. So I'll focus more on what are the steps to going to bed and how that can be helpful. So like I said before, having a consistent bedtime and making sure to stick to it. And this is one of the other reasons why I showed the National Sleep Foundation recommendations is because they're going to be, depending on the age, there's going to be different periods where they will feel more sleepy. And so slowly shifting the bedtime back as they grow and develop. And this is where the idea of a fated bedtime comes in. So there may be a time where your child is having a really difficult time going to sleep. And so you try to get them in bed at, say, 8 o'clock, and it slowly becomes more and more difficult, and they're up and down out of bed. They are coming out of their room. They're walking around in their room. They're getting up, getting down, doing all of these things. And then they finally get to sleep around 10. That has definitely happened to me. And it can be very frustrating. It can be very frustrating as a parent. It can be frustrating for other people in the household, some siblings. And the idea of a fated bedtime is to start with when they are actually falling asleep and slowly move that back to when you want them to fall asleep. So starting with our example where bedtime is now 10 o'clock, and maybe that may not feel very good. It's not very satisfying to say, yes, my child goes to bed at 10 o'clock, but that's when they are falling asleep. So you start there, and then you start your bedtime routine before that. And so it leads up to that 10 o'clock time. And then once they become more restful and they're able to adjust to that, and that they're falling asleep right at that 10 o'clock mark or close to it, you start to move it further earlier in the evening. You don't ever move it more than 30 minutes. This is not the amount of time that the rhythms can adjust is the max is about 30 minutes. So this is where consistency and persistence comes in, where you want to make sure that you are consistently doing the routine at the same time every night, and then slowly beginning to move it further and further back, earlier and earlier, so that you then get to a goal time, which maybe you want them in bed at 8. And so these things are not going to happen overnight. This is why you just need to be consistent. And even if they're going to bed a little bit later, try to keep it within like a 30 to 60-minute window. You don't want them earlier or later, because then that could be, again, with thinking about sleep pressure and wanting to synchronize all of these pieces with the circadian rhythm and the sleep pressure, you want to make sure that there is that consistency. So having a bedtime routine that has some wind down period can be very helpful, usually about 15 to 30 minutes before bed. Again, there's going to be a wide range there, where maybe it will take certain days, maybe more, maybe less, or there may be certain individuals that just need a little bit more time to wind down. And having those routines can be very, very, very helpful. So you want to identify things that are very calming, rather than those that are stimulating. And what can also be very helpful with having a routine is using these visual aids. And this may be something that you and your family are familiar with, but these visual aids can be very helpful for individuals on the autism spectrum. And this is just a brief example of something like that. But I know Linda and her wonderful team are able to put these together for families. And so having these steps that everybody can see and you're able to walk through, okay, we're going to start with putting on our pajamas, using the bathroom, washing our hands, brushing our teeth. We'll drink one last drink of water. We will have 1 or 2 stories, and then we'll go to bed. And that is going to happen. You can even put times on here if you're able to do that, and have that routine be consistent each and every night. And I know this will put a lot of demand on you as a parent. But once you start getting into this routine, it can be very helpful and to getting them to fall asleep. And so that is going to be on the falling asleep time. And then if we think towards the morning, you want to have that rise time consistent as well. So having them waking up and opening up all the curtains, so you get that immediate light source, so that your child or yourself or others are able to get that Zeitgeber to align their circadian rhythm, have that sunlight come in, and it promotes wakefulness. So having that be consistent, get as much natural light in the morning as possible, and working there. So we have the routine from bedtime all the way to waking up, and you can then have that be consistent throughout. And then thinking a little bit more about falling asleep, there can be some difficulty around that as well. Or if your child wakes up in the middle of the night, and you've established that bedtime routine, but then they're popping awake in the middle of the night. One thing to note here is that everybody will naturally have some amount of awakeness during the middle of the night. This is the way that our sleep cycles operate, but most of the time we're able to fall right back asleep and we don't remember it at all. So maybe for you or other family members, they're like, I'm always waking up at 2:22 or something like that. That's because this is a normal progression of their sleep cycle. And this is something that it's okay if somebody wakes up in the middle of the night, just normalizing that. But then what you want to do is continue to try to have your child fall asleep on their own. So starting very gradual. And again, this is all going to be self-paced. So figuring what works best for you and your family. But you can start with getting them back into bed, or if this is difficulty falling asleep right at the onset, just being with them, rubbing their back, rubbing their stomach, their legs, helping them fall asleep and have them feel comfortable with you around. And then once they are fully asleep, then you're going to remove yourself. Then it will be gradual after that, where instead of rubbing your hand on their leg or their back, that you then just have a hand on them for a few nights, and then they're able to fall asleep. And then you slowly start removing yourself and doing fewer and fewer things. So then it would be at bedtime, you read your books, they get in bed, and then your hand is just on their bed. And then maybe after a few nights, that is going well. So then you don't have your hands on their bed at all. Maybe there's a chair in their room and you're just hanging out there until they feel comfortable going to sleep. So it is this gradual process. Anything with sleep is going to be a gradual process, but it can be immensely helpful in the long run. The other portion that can sometimes be helpful, and I'm sure others have heard this in the past, is just having your child cry it out. This is going to be, there can be some concerns here around amount of noise, if you're in an apartment complex or something like that, or if there is safety concerns for the child, that we want to make sure that everybody is safe in these situations. So maybe the crying out method will not be as helpful for you, but I know that there are certain companies and other supports that can be there to help make sure that the child is safe in those settings, if you decide to use this method or use other methods to help keep them in their bed or some sort of restraint. But the cried out method is something that can be very difficult, where you need to go all in, because you can't go into the room and it can mess everything up, basically, where the idea behind this method is the child is upset, is crying in this setting, and they are waiting for you to come in to comfort them. And you want them to feel comfortable in these settings. So if you continue to go in and comfort them for a few minutes and then remove yourself, they will begin to think, oh, when I cry or I yell to this amount, then that's when my parent will come in and make me feel better. And then they leave, and then I'm going to keep crying until I hit that threshold, and then my parent's going to come in. There will be some nights where there will be lots of crying. And it can be heartbreaking. It can be very upsetting. And just making sure that your child is safe is going to be the top priority, because over time, they'll be able to recognize that, oh, this situation that I'm in, just laying in my bed and trying to sleep, is not harmful. So I'm going to feel more comfortable in this space. And over time, eventually that pairing will be there. Another idea that can be helpful is the idea of a sleep pass, where if you can make these up, where you have little sheets of paper and you can make them with your child and have them, they get like you can give them 3 a night, 3 a month, or have a certain amount of time where they get them replenished, or you can continue to have them, where they get these passes, like a hall pass almost, where if in the middle of the night they're upset and they just want to come to you and get some snuggles or a kiss or a hug or an extra cup of water, they can turn in one of these passes to you. You go and do that, and then so they like paid their pass, and then they'll feel more comfortable going back to sleep. This can be very helpful and effective for some families. And plus, it's fun to make things with your child. The other is using positive reinforcement in the morning after they sleep through the night. So having certain guidelines of, you need to stay in your bed for the whole night, or stay in your room the entire night. If you do that, then when we get up, you get a sticker, or you get a coin to go into your jar. And this was something that was really helpful for me and my family. We had this big sticker chart where both me and my wife and my daughter were like, we made it, and we had each day, we got her to pick out the stickers, and we made it a really big deal, and really got my daughter excited about wanting to stay inside in her bed all night. And it was just really fun in the morning. You wake up, you get really excited, and you're able to put that sticker on there. And so this is a really fun and helpful piece of information that can be helpful for you and your family. And plus, we had this posted on her door. So every time we'd walk by it, we'd be able to see how many nights she was sleeping. And then after so many nights, she got to cash that in and get something. Like I think we got her a Peppa Pig watch that she really wanted. So this can be really fun for the family. So a lot of the things that I've talked about so far have been mainly disturbances with sleep. So this could be just trouble getting to sleep for a few nights, or for a little while. But then there are some larger sleep difficulties that can be diagnosed. So this may be you have tried all of the things that I've talked about, and they don't seem to be working. You've been consistent with them. You've tried all different combinations, and you're still not finding your child or yourself or those around you that you're trying to help and support. It's just not working. And so this would be when you would need to go to a sleep specialist or your primary care physician at first, and just talk about these things. So there is insomnia, which is going to be difficulty falling asleep, difficulty maintaining sleep, or waking up earlier than expected. There is sleep-related breathing disorders, with the most apparent being sleep apnea. And this occurs when your airway becomes blocked or restricted to the point where you're not getting enough oxygen while you're sleeping. Restless leg syndrome, any circadian rhythm disorder, where your circadian rhythm is advanced or delayed so much that it makes it difficult to operate, or narcolepsy. So these are going to require additional types of intervention, rather than just the supports that I've already talked about. And some of the things that you may have experienced, or when talking to your physician already, they may have suggested using melatonin, either in small or large doses. And there's different types of melatonin. And I am in no way an expert in, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm going to be able to talk about some of the things that I've read. And there has been studies that have shown that individuals on the autism spectrum have lower levels of baseline melatonin, and can benefit from having additional melatonin supplements prior to bedtime. And they will not necessarily, and so far, there haven't been any long-term consequences for youth where any like disruptions in development or puberty, either delayed or advanced. So that can be something that can be very helpful for you and your family, either having delayed or like slow release melatonin, where it's taken earlier on in the day to help, or it's taken so that it helps maintain sleep, or rapid release where it helps initiate sleep. And these can be wide ranging in terms of what melatonin is used for, or what people, the amount that is needed and required for melatonin. So that's something that you'd want to touch base with your primary care physician about how much you or your child should be taking. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about sleep studies. And so if you feel like you're having any of these difficulties, or those close to you are having these types of difficulties, with like the restless leg syndrome or an advanced circadian rhythm, where your circadian rhythm is shifted so much that your peak alertness may be during the middle of the day, during the middle of the night, where then you're not able to align your circadian rhythm to the light and dark schedule that we have. So if you're experiencing these types of things, then you think about sleep studies. And so I wanted to just touch base on, if you or your family is transitioning into looking at these types of things, I wanted to talk about some of the pieces that you may go through, or maybe asked to do or fill out. So there are these various levels in how you can measure sleep and what you can think about. And these are the 4 pieces that I'll be talking about, are the most common, and are actually the only ones that I know about. So they're not only the most common, they're some of the only ones. The first being a sleep diary. This is from the National Sleep Foundation, and you can get this online. There are lots of apps. Some of the ones that I use as a clinician there's one called CBTI, and this is a really great sleep tracker, but it's just recording when you went to bed, when you were in bed, when you fell asleep, when you woke up, when you got out of bed, and really just having a whole diary around your schedule, and having from the day to the night. Like I said, we think about sleep in this 24-hour period. So really trying to track and organize all of that information to highlight when all of this happens. So then your sleep specialist will be able to focus on, okay, it looks like you are drinking caffeine a little bit too late, or you are working out later, which then makes it difficult for you to fall asleep. So that's one piece. This is something that you can already do with yourself or with your children, and just track their sleep. There is also self-reported sleep measures. This is the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, and it's a series of 8 questions. And this really gets at how disrupted your sleep is, and whether you're having difficulties with it, and where those difficulties are. There are expanded measures. I think you can get this, the PSQI, it's called the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. You can get this online, and you should be able to fill this out yourself and score it. But this might be something that, going into an office, you or your child will fill out. The other being, so we've talked about the more tracking or self-report side of things. There are also these watches that you can get, which is called Actigraphy. And a lot of the new smartwatches have this built in, but the sensors in them are not going to be quite as advanced as the ones that a sleep specialist would have. So what will most likely happen if you suspect having some sort of sleep disorder is your physician will provide one of these to you or somebody in your family, and you'll wear it usually on your non-dominant wrist for about 2 weeks. and it gives these readouts. So you can see the charts there in the background, and it shows when people are most active to get a sense of how active they are during sleep. And there are also other things that can happen where they have light sensors on them, so it can see when you're getting the most amount of blue light or the most amount of amber light, or all these various things that can be very helpful to either promoting or hindering sleep. So that's a really easy and straightforward. There's also, yes, there is also at home, it'll measure oxygen levels during sleep. So this was something that it will clamp onto your finger, and you just kind of tape it on there overnight, and it measures your oxygen levels to see if maybe there is some obstructive sleep apnea, and you need some intervention for that. So that can also be something that's not necessarily mentioned here, but can be another measure of sleep in trying to understand and diagnose where the difficulties lie. The final being polysomnography. And really what this is, it is a conglomeration of various pieces of information. So I'm pretty sure this guy is sleeping and nothing else has happened to him. I've participated in a sleep study, and these can be very uncomfortable to wear. But the idea is there are these sensors that are glued to your head that can look at EEG measures, and that's how you're able to recognize when somebody is in different stages of sleep. There is then going to be a sensor in your nose to measure oxygen levels and oxygen production. There is then going to be various straps around your chest and your legs to look at both respiration, heart rate, and then the movement in your legs to see if restless leg syndrome may be a concern. There's the sensor on your finger. There's just sensors basically all over your body. And then it's all connected into a computer that's on the other side of the room. So this is what will happen when there is usually an overnight sleep study, where you will have to go into the hospital and your child will spend the night there to get an idea of all of these different measures. And this is said to be the gold standard of measuring sleep. But there's been some criticism, like it's able to collect a lot of information, from brain waves to respiration to movement to oxygen levels. It's able to pick up on all of these pieces, but at the same time, it is really difficult to sleep with that stuff on. First, you're in a completely new environment, which is already disruptive, and then you have all of these things connected to you, which is just another level of difficulty in terms of sleep. So this is something that that can eventually happen in terms of measuring sleep and seeing a sleep specialist. But I wanted to just provide you with that information in case this is something that you would like to do moving forward. And there are some helpful resources. The Autism Speaks website has some toolkits that are very helpful for sleep and promoting sleep and things like that. You can reach out to me to get a copy of these slides or see if there's other things. The National Sleep Foundation is also a very great resource. There is a Spectrum News. There is an article about how to get children with autism to sleep that is really helpful and effective. And yeah, these are some pieces that I pulled information from, but then also with other experiences that I've had. And I put that here. So just as a summary, one of the things that I hope I highlighted was being consistent in whatever you're trying to do. You want to make sure that this is consistent, making sure that the environment that the individual is in is inviting and open to sleep, and making sure that they wind down. Having that bedtime routine, making sure, again, that's consistent, and then really trying to find a system that works for you, works for your family. That's the bottom line, is this needs to work for you. There can be lots of recommendations, but trying to find what works best for you is going to be the key. So I wanted to send a quick thank you to those involved. Linda's amazing, Amy's great, and so is Ben. And as a final little plug, I wanted to plug the wind down. This is something with Amy and Linda, who on Wednesdays, there's going to be 2 more of these, where they get to talk about helping parents and supporting those in our community, either in the Champaign area or just in the community as a whole. So please sign up for that. They are great and awesome people. And you can, if you're not drinking wine or beer right now, you can do that when you listen to them. So that's going to be it for my portion here. And I've seen a couple questions come through, and I saw that Linda was able to answer a couple of them, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time doing that.
That was wonderful, Dustin. Thank you so much for that information. So helpful. And I really do think that you drove home the point of consistency, and that sleep is not just something that we have to think about at night, but something that really we have to be thinking about all day long. Questions are kind of pouring in here, and I will try to keep them thematic, topical. There were a couple of questions on the registration, and I see this theme kind of coming up about sleep disorders. Is it something that can be more prevalent in childhood and outgrown later? Is it something that comes and goes? And then how does that apply to the autism population?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One that it's something that researchers in this area are very aware of. But like I said at the beginning, that these sleep disorders in individuals with autism spectrum disorder, it's understudied. And this is a theme that I saw in various readings that I've done and other things that I've seen, that in this population, that there hasn't been a lot of research in this area, but there's also a great need for it, where we do see that there is an increased amount of sleep disorders or sleep problems in individuals on the autism spectrum. And then also there are those developmental pieces. So there can be some things where during childhood, there are issues and there are problems, and they can get in the way of sleep, but then later on they may grow out of them because there may be maybe they have become comfortable in the setting, or there are different pieces with natural development that have kind of come into play.
All right. So the other question that's being discussed is about mild sleep apnea. And it sounds like this is a child with autism who has mild sleep apnea, and the ENT is saying that the adenoids and tonsils aren't large enough to be removed. I see second opinion as a recommendation here. Do you have any expertise you can speak to on that, or this is just something that maybe they should just keep persisting with?
Yeah, sleep apnea can be a tricky one in younger kiddos in particular, just because of that fact that the tonsils and adenoids can be difficult. That's not necessarily an area that I've done a lot of research in. I know that the CPAP machines, which basically push air into your airway to keep that air flowing consistently, is going to be the most effective. But that then introduces a host of other difficulties if there are sensory concerns or noise concerns, things like that. And again, this is just an area that has not been fully researched and understood. Yeah.
And
Okay.
Dustin, I'll jump in here for a second. I think I was trying to respond to that, to the person that asked that question. I think if you are feeling like your child's sleep apnea, again, even if they went in for a sleep study, that was only that one night in a very unusual situation that they attempted to get some data on their obstruction. And so I think if it showed mild obstruction even that evening or that night that the child slept, and you feel like they are stopping breathing, you can hear them struggling to breathe. I know I had this experience with my own son, and it took like 2 years to convince the doctor. And by then he had an enlarged heart because the oxygen deprivation was so significant. And I kept explaining that he's stopping breathing, literally. And they really thought I was exaggerating until we went in for pneumonia, and he actually had the enlarged heart from the sleep apnea. So I really personally feel strongly, if you are a parent that feels that your child has significant airway obstruction, because my child was even turning blue at times, like, try to use your cell phone, maybe try to get a little bit of video of what they look like and sound like while they're sleeping, to bring back to the doctor to try and convince them that, yeah, they're really struggling with the breathing. If you really think that is what's happening here with part of it. I mean, again, sleep is complicated. It might not be the only thing that's happening, but if you think that's contributing to their poor sleep, if they're really struggling with desaturation on their oxygenation, it's also going to impact other organs in their body, their brain, their behavior, their heart. So don't take that lightly, coming from a parent who was dismissed for a couple of years and really caused serious issues with my own son. I think we've talked about melatonin a bit. We talked about behavioral strategies. We talked about environmental strategies. We talked about positive reinforcement. All those are where you should begin with sleep. And then move into the melatonin along with the behavioral. Don't throw the behavioral strategies out the window once you start using melatonin. Keep those things going. If that is really not cutting it, moving into other medications with your physician for sleep. I encourage you not to be afraid of that as a parent, because if sleep is disrupting, it can disrupt everything, their behavior, their education, their schooling, and really foundationally getting the sleep under control is where you have to start before you start working on all those other things that are going on during the day if you have a child that's not sleeping well. So I know we didn't get into other medications that are available, but I would encourage that strongly if you really have a very, very poor sleeper. So going back to Dustin's chart within the range and normal and you definitely are going to need your sleep diary to sort of prove what's happening.
Yep.
If they are really falling shy of their hours of sleep consistently, using that to make a case to bring to your doctor about moving forward more quickly with more aggressive sleep intervention sooner rather than later can be helpful. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
It's great to get the person who's studying expertise and then the parent who's been there expertise, and also the autism specialist expertise. So really a wealth of information. Dustin, there have been a couple of questions about specific sleep disorders. Could you explain the circadian rhythm disorder a little bit more and restless legs a little bit more, please?
Yeah, this is a lot of the research and things that I do focus more on the more common sleep problems. So a lot of what I say is going to be more of things that I've read peripherally. The circadian rhythm disorder is going to be when there is a biological mismatch, basically, between what it is that the light and dark schedule is to what your body is telling you to do. And there can be certain advancements or delays where, like when I had that chart up, I pushed the circadian rhythm up one way just a little bit and down just a little bit to show these more extremes. This would be an above and beyond that, where there may be a complete flip to the sleep schedule. And I know, Linda, there's some experience there from you as well. Do you have anything to add on circadian rhythm disorders?
Um, yeah, I mean, you did a good job explaining that, and in both these, when you were showing light, our bodies, the whole melatonin release process and circadian rhythm is very much driven by the light source that's coming in. And so it's exactly what you just said. It's a mismatch of what is supposed to be happening, the way the brain processes and those chemicals that are released, to what actually happens. And so melatonin is one of those things that can work on a circadian rhythm dysfunction to a degree. There's more medications on the market now, like those non-24 drugs. So they're being marketed for people that are blind, completely blind, because they light obviously isn't affecting their whole rhythm, circadian rhythm, the way a seeing person is. But for people like my own son, who has a rare genetic disorder with a circadian rhythm dysfunction, he is on those medications that help shift the circadian rhythm. And as Dustin said, those medications work slowly. You don't shift a circadian rhythm overnight. That takes months to move that circadian rhythm in line with the light, the way that the way the rest of us are working. So that is one element. If you have a severely sleep disturbed individual in your home and you're working with a doctor, that's why you really have to get to a medical professional that does sleep, so that you're working on all these things together, because they very well can put your child on a melatonin type of circadian rhythm medication and give them something to sleep now, while it takes time to build in, and then maybe back off some of those heavier hitting medications that are getting them to sleep now, once they've reached a rhythm, if that's not working. So it's complicated. And I see there's a question about, the reward charts. Is that enough? Well, going back to what we said, that's where you start, the good sleep hygiene, using positive reinforcement, using environmental control, using reward charts. If you've done all that well and consistently, back to that slide about consistency, all at the beginning of Dustin's, if you've really given that your full effort, and you're still struggling with this, then continue to move on, but don't throw those things out the window. Don't give up on the good sleep hygiene and the reinforcement and all those, because it will backtrack into you needing those as well. Even using medication isn't going to be the only thing that helps. You're going to have positive reinforcement to break the bad habits and continue on with your good sleep hygiene. So I think I've answered that one for the person asked about charts. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, I think the theme that I'm getting here is, when do you know that it's time to seek more than just a behavioral approach or things you can buy over the counter? Do you have a more concrete answer for that? Or is it really just, I always say, wait until you can't wait anymore. Is there a time when you should intervene? And, since sleep is so important for children.
Well, again, I'm going to give my case is pretty extreme. We didn't know my son had this genetic problem, but we were dealing with extreme sleep issues from the time he was about, 15 months old. Well, even younger, because of the apnea. By a year, even before that, I kept saying he wasn't. So all these things, it depends is always the answer. If you think your child is turning blue and not breathing at night, today is the day to be assertive. Every night your child is losing oxygen, they're doing damage to their body if it's serious. So if it's apnea, if you believe it's apnea and you hear them stopping breathing and struggling and turning blue, today's the day. If there's behavioral, you think they're behavioral, they're waking up, they're 18 months, 2.5, 3, it's within a range, you're doing everything you can behaviorally. If it's really significant, you're adding the melatonin, you could do that over the counter yourself. That's not going to hurt. I would do those things sooner rather than later, if it's consistent night after night, and you've talked to your physician, obviously.
Yeah.
But at the time, and all these have to be taken into consideration with a doctor. But I will tell you, my son was on serious sleep medication by the time he was 3. We were on prescription sleep drugs because he never slept more than 2 hours at a time. He was up 2 hours, down 2 hours in a 24-hour cycle. And so you really have to go back to Dustin's slide and what's expected, what's normal, and having your sleep diary and go, oh my gosh, either my kid is so far off one way or the other. We really need to be seeking professional guidance. But it's never too early to seek professional guidance. If you're a sleep disorder in your child causes a sleep disorder in you as a parent, and that's just as serious.
Yeah, sleep is one of those things that it affects the individual who's having the difficulty, but then it permeates to the entire household. And so you want to get things under control as much as you can and try all these behavioral options, like Linda was saying, and see what's normal first, see if there are things that you can do, get that, look at the sleep diary, start collecting some data, seeing what it is that's working, and then trying things out. A lot of the things that are behavioral are going to be experiments where you try, okay, let's try bedtime at 8 p.m. That didn't work. What was going on? Were they sleeping? Were they too tired, or were they not tired enough? Let's push it back half an hour. Mm-hmm. And it's this process that kind of writing things down, taking notes is going to be your best bet, because then you have that. So when you go to the sleep specialist, you can say, look at all this stuff that I've done. I've done all of these things. And then they can look at that and then start from there, rather than having you go back and do all those things anyways.
Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about autism, I'll say what our kiddos are really good at is making routines.
Yes.
And so it's doubly hard to break a bad routine. Mm-hmm. And so for those that are coaching young families, get them in a good sleep routine as soon as possible. Because if it's a routine issue, we want them to have good sleep routines as soon as you can. But if they're in a bad routine, plus they have sleep challenges, like my son had many between apnea and a circadian rhythm dysfunction, and we didn't have the full picture of his sleep disorder till he was quite old. I mean, like 12 years old. And we had the full picture by then. We had bits and pieces of this picture we were addressing all along, thinking, oh, well, that was it once we had the tonsils and adenoids out. And that was it for the apnea, but we continued with the behavior. And as he developed really strong nighttime behaviors of eating and watching TV and all these rituals he had to do, even once we got really good medication on board, we had to put in a really strong behavioral program to break those night routines, because I could tell he was now tired, but it was the routine that was starting to drive him more than the awakeness. And so we had to do a really heavy behavioral program to break him of those nighttime habits, even once we got strong medication on board. All right.
Dustin, I think you did a really nice job of speaking to, we had a question about sleep regression and, a few bad nights and getting back on track. I don't think there's a magic number as to how long it takes to get back on track, but again, just implementing as soon as you can bring the strategies back in, getting those implemented again. You did a nice job explaining that. Last question, is there a reason why the need for sleep decreases with age?
That is just the why we sleep, and a lot of these questions still, there's some ideas into why this happens. A lot of times with sleep, it is a time where people think that it's when we can solidify particular learning habits. And that's where a lot of learning actually takes place, where we do all of the tasks throughout the day, but then it becomes concrete during various stages within sleep. It's also thought to be a time of regeneration in terms of brain functioning and synapses and neurons, and there's like this process that occurs. And so during infancy, there's a greater need for it because there is this structure that needs to be set up, and there's rapid amounts of learning that take place early on. So being able to have that at the beginning, and then it tends to taper out towards once, like around 25 is when the brain tends to stop developing, and that's when we see that it kind of levels out. But this is kind of going back to some of the things that I've already said, is that during school, and particularly middle school and high school, it is important for youth to get good sleep. And our school system is not set up right now to really speak to that, which is unfortunate. And there's some efforts that have been put out to try to shift the start time back. And like I said before, there's been lots of improvements, both academically, with physical health as well. There's been reports that have shown that sleep restriction then has detrimental health effects with like heart disease and things like that. So just sleep is extremely important. And it's one of the things that I think needs to be studied more. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Well, we most certainly appreciate what you're doing, Dustin. This has been a wealth of information. I hope that we covered everyone's questions this evening. As I stated earlier, this will be recorded. I've had a couple of questions about EI training credit. We are not set up for that right now. I think that's something that needs to be established before a webinar is given or an instructional piece is given. So I do not believe that that's something that we can do at this point. But hopefully this information is information that all of you, whether parent or professional or even someone with your own sleep disorder, will be able to implement in one way or another. Thanks again to Dustin for all of your time and effort and wonderful information, and to the Autism Program for sponsoring this.